everybody. Welcome to Matt Connarton Unleashed. I'm your host, Matt Connarton, and I'm here to sneeze all over you today. And you might be wondering why I would say something like that. I recently hired a consultant to kind of help me with the show in terms of marketing and promotion and whatnot, and he was telling me, you need a tagline. You need some sort of a slogan for the show. And I said, well, what do you suggest? And he said, you want something that relates to you, but also captures the interest and imagination of your audience, but something relevant. And he said, there's a lot of pollen in the air right now, right? And I said, yeah, there sure is. And he said, you're allergic to it, right? I said, oh, yeah, I sneeze all the time because of it. And he said, well, there you go. You should open every show by saying, I'm Matt Connarton, and I'm here to sneeze all over you. And I said, I don't know. It sounds a little weird to me, but I guess you know more about this stuff than I do, because he's a professional consultant and whatnot. And then the other suggestion he made was, and then I should inform the audience that, you're lucky to be watching today because I have a sneeze-tastic show in store for you. And that one, I had to kind of put the brakes on. I was like, wait a minute, sneeze-tastic, that's not even a word. I mean, I'm going to sound ridiculous if I say something like that. I can't say that. They're going to think I'm some kind of freak or something. So I said, the sneeze all over you thing, that's money. I mean, I love that. I'll say that every week. But telling them I have a sneeze-tastic show, they're going to think I'm some kind of freak or something. They're going to think I'm weird. They're going to be like, what's he talking about? This guy's strange. That's not even a word. So... And so, I obviously was not happy with his second suggestion. So, and I did tell him, I said, look, I said, I'm sorry to have to say this. I'm sorry to do this, but, I'm paying you all this money to consult. I can't have somebody on my team. I said, this is important to me. I take this stuff seriously, obviously. I said, I can't have somebody on my team who's just, who can't do the job. So, I had to be a little bit ruthless and make a decision. And I told him, I said, I'm sorry, and I said it as politely as I could. I said, I'm going to need you to come up with some more, a list of alternate suggestions that I can then peruse and perhaps choose. But I also told him very firmly and sternly, and I said, but if you fail to do that, if you fail to come up with an alternate list, I will reconsider reluctantly your original suggestion. But I'll probably feel a little bit resentful about it, though I'll try not to. So that's where we are. But I'm here to sneeze all over you. Now, don't get me wrong. I even though I'm not going to say the other part, I do have a sneeze-tastic show for you. I don't want you to think I don't. Not literally, but it sounds exciting, doesn't it? The pollen has been killing me. So we'll see. We'll see about this consultant. I don't know. So far he's, 1-1. You know what I'm saying? Anyway, welcome. And we'll get the housekeeping out of the way. Tomorrow, Thursday, if you're assuming you're watching this live on Wednesday, I will be a guest, as I am every second Thursday of each month on Dr. Kevin's show, which you can hear live at 6 p.m. Eastern every Thursday on IPM Nation. The Dr. Kevin Show is the name of Dr. Kevin's show. And I should see if the consultant I'm working with can come up with a tagline for him. I'm sure he'd love that. Every second Thursday of each month, I go on Dr. Kevin's show, and we talk about the issues of the day. We kibitz, I think that's a word. Chew the fat, which is a terrible expression that makes me nauseous when I say it. But that's what we do. We discuss the issues of the day. So that'll be exciting. Also, too, yesterday I was invited by Mr. John Hopwood himself to once again be on his show this week on Ward 13 with John Hopwood. I think he wants me to call him later to figure out exactly what we're doing, because when he messaged me, he said that he wanted me either to maybe guest host for him again, or maybe co-host with him, or maybe he could interview me or something. He hadn't decided, but he wants me to be on, which is cool. If you didn't see it, I was on a couple weeks ago. I guest hosted for him, and we discussed with our guest, Bonnie Wright, or my guest, because he sat out and let me fill in for him. But we discussed the Trans-Pacific Partnership. And if you missed it and you're interested in that subject, because it is important and it has been in the news a lot, see him sniffling, I'm telling you, it's going to be sneeze-tastic after all. I can already tell. Pollen is so bad. Sometimes it looks like it's snowing. There's so much pollen. You can find that show. We did archive it on IPM Nation, even though it's John's show. He let us archive it on IPM Nation on under Matt Connarton Unleashed. You can find it online. So, and we'll do the same when I go on the show this week. So, and that does air here on MPTS Fridays at 4 p.m. live. So, well, not live, we tape it, but you know what I mean. You know what I mean. It's like you're watching it live. So, and the other little bit of housekeeping too, and then we'll get to what I want to talk about today. People have been asking me about, speaking of archives, we do archive the television edition of Unleashed the same day. It goes up on IPM Nation because I know a lot of people can't watch it live because of the time of day that it's on. But people have been asking me about the radio edition of the show. Of course, the radio edition of the show is every Tuesday and Thursday night at 11 p.m. Eastern on IPM Nation and also on our affiliate Ohm Times Radio. We are on the IPM Nation side of things. We're going to completely revamp our on-demand portion to try to streamline it, make things easier to find and whatnot, because we have content on there going all the way back to 2007 with the very first shows that we did and on IPM Nation. And we archive everything. We keep it forever. Or at least until the site gets hacked and the whole thing goes away. Hopefully that'll never happen. I probably shouldn't even joke about that. But we are going to revamp the on-demand section to make it easier to find things. So we don't currently have on IPM Nation an archive of the new shows that we've been doing since we got picked up by Ohm Times Radio, but we will. But you can find them at ohmtimes.com/IOM. You can click the archive link and you can find all the archive shows there. We've only been on Ohm Times for a couple of months now, so, it's only a couple of months worth of shows, but they are there. And we will get them up on IPM Nation as well. So, all right. I did post something on Facebook earlier. It seems like there's a lot of everyone's favorite topic, abortion. There's a lot of abortion stuff going on. Actually, the truth is there's always abortion stuff going on. There has been since I was a kid. It's always been a contentious issue. But there've been a couple new things that have happened. One of them sounds really out there from a very severely pro-life governor of Wisconsin, Scott Walker, who also has a Republican nomination to try to win. I was actually stunned when I saw what he is proposing, or at least what he has signed on for in Wisconsin, which may help him win favor with the Republican base, the conservative base of the Republican Party, as far as winning the nomination, but it's really going to damage him in the general election. But of course, he's really a VP candidate anyway. He and Marco Rubio, I'm sorry, I don't have any water to gulp, but Marco Rubio of Florida, I mean, they're really running for vice president as far as I can tell. That's just what I see when I look at those guys. I see a potential VP to share a ticket with a Republican presidential nominee in, say, a Jeb Bush. Although Jeb's poll numbers aren't that great. I don't know who has strong polling numbers on the Republican side, but it's still very early. And not everyone who's expected to run is declared yet. That's how early it is. By the way, before we get into this, a little side note, and I talked about this last night on the radio show. Rick Santorum held his first campaign event in Iowa the other day. And, it's funny. Every single vote counts. And the Iowa caucus last time was an example of that, because I forget who they finally declared as the winner, but there was a lot of confusion in 2012 as far as who won the Iowa caucus because the voting was so close. And I think at one point they had stated that Santorum lost by only 8 votes. So, and that all got revised. And I'm not even sure who the ultimate winner was because they kept revising it. And in the end, it didn't matter. It's a caucus. That's why in New Hampshire, we're the most important because we're the first in the nation primary. We're not a caucus. I don't even understand the whole caucus system. But Rick Santorum, but he did well in Iowa back in 2012 when he ran for president. He did pretty well overall. I mean, he was never a serious threat to Romney, but he was a thorn in his side for a while. So he holds his, he's taking another whack at it in 2016, holds his first campaign event. And like I said, numbers count. A whopping 1 person showed up at his campaign event in Iowa. So if that is an early indication, and again, it is early, I'm thinking that he doesn't quite have the same wild enthusiasm, if he ever had wild enthusiasm behind him. He doesn't have that in 2016 or in 2015 for 2016 as he did in 2011 and 2012. Yeah, literally. When I first saw the story pop up in my Facebook feed, I thought it was from The Onion because I love The Onion. But no, it's a legit story. Apparently, they had a great conversation. He and this one supporter who showed up, they spoke for about 10 minutes. And that was it. I don't know. You know, it's funny. We won't get it. I have more to say about Sam Torm, but I don't want to get too off topic here. But but he's a hardcore pro-lifer, as most of the Republicans are. I don't know where Pataki is. Former governor of New York, George Pataki. I'll have to look that up because he's considered to be the moderate in the race. Like he's 2016's John Huntsman, so which means he has no chance of winning the nomination. I didn't even know he was. A lot of people I don't think even realize he's running. Pataki, that is. But I want to talk about abortion because some new things have happened, and I have some new insights that I want to share with you. Now, my views on it, basically, I describe myself as pro-choice with limitations. You know, I am pro-choice. I have talked extensively on this show about, though, how my feelings about it, or at least what I have to say about it, are perhaps a little more nuanced than what a lot of other people do, because we live in a political culture that is so polarized that everyone kind of goes to their corners on most issues, and kind of, the parties, not necessarily all the individuals certainly, but the parties tend to take these kind of extreme positions. So for example, on an issue like abortion, you have a lot of Republicans who will take this extreme sort of Christian conservative position, or at least what I think is extreme, where not even cases like rape and incest can an abortion ever be committed, because that's murder in their view. And I solidly disagree with that. But you also have that same extremism that happens on the left. And a lot of Democrats are so pro-choice that they even object to things that I personally think are perfectly reasonable to address legislatively, even though I'm pro-choice. Things like late-term abortion, things like parental notification, which I'm absolutely in favor of. But a lot of Democrats take that extreme position where they don't want any kind of regulation. They don't want anything changed at all. So everybody kind of goes to their corners and they take these extreme positions. And I know why that happens. And I think it's unfortunate because to me, it's more complicated than that. For example, I'm someone who's pro-choice, doesn't mean I'm pro-abortion. There are a lot of pro-lifers who use that term pro-abortion, which personally offends me. And I'm not easy to offend. But when someone tells me I'm pro-abortion, I find that offensive. Being pro-choice does not mean I want people to have abortions. Personally, I think it's a bad option. I would discourage people from having abortions. But I also don't think it's something the government can or should legislate. And I think that the way to decrease abortion in this country is through education and availability of contraceptives and things of that nature. And we'll get to that in a moment because there's good news on that front. But what's interesting is, because I'm someone who has a bit of a nuanced view on it, and I'm not strictly all-in pro-life or 100% pro-choice, but I see it as a little more complicated because it's not a black and white either-or kind of world that we live in. These issues are complicated. At least I think they are. But, if I'm talking to someone who is pro-life, yes, they will label someone like me, even though I support things like banning late-term abortion unless medically necessary, or I agree with parental notification. Even with those provisions, they will. Someone who is solidly what I think is extremist pro-life will call someone like me pro-abortion. And on the other end, someone who is so solidly pro-choice, they don't want any kind of regulations or restrictions on anything, they will look at me and say, wait a minute, you said you're pro-choice. You're not pro-choice. You want to legislate things like late-term abortions. You want parental notification. You're in favor of the fetal homicide bill. You're not pro-choice. You want all these restrictions. So, and it's one of the reasons why, by the way, I'm an independent. I don't fit into either party because I don't necessarily take extremist positions on everything. You know, as the two parties have become so polarized, you have to take the extremist position on stuff just to fit in with the party. And sorry, I tend to be a centrist, and I tend to see things as a bit complicated sometimes, like abortion. So I'm just kind of explaining that so those who are new to the show understand where I'm coming from. But also, too, I understand a little bit better than I used to. I'm beginning to understand, I think, why those who are pro-choice, many of them, not so much the average voter probably, but more so politicians on the left, why they take that what appears to be such an extreme position where they want nothing regulated at all and just, abortion on demand, no questions asked, why they're so in favor of that, because it's that whole slippery slope thing. And sometimes I wish that everyone wasn't so paranoid and were more open to compromise politically instead of approaching everything with this idea that, well, if we give an inch on this or on that or whatever, then it's a slippery slope. And next thing you know, we're going in entirely the wrong direction. But I do have a growing sympathy for those who are pro-choice, who do kind of take that extremist position specifically because they fear the slippery slope. Because I can see from their vantage point, there's these Republicans who, these stories pop up all the time, who try to do this really extremist sounding stuff, or they try to manipulate legislation in a way, which we'll get to in a minute, like what's been going on with Texas, where they've been able to force the closure of all these abortion clinics. The pro-life movement, they're insistent that life begins at conception, to the point now where they're claiming, the other show that I do with the Honorable Gary S. Hopper, Rock, Paper, Hand Grenades, we've had people come on that show and say things like, well, the science is in on this. Science has vindicated us and proven that life begins at conception. I don't know what scientists they're talking about. I don't know where they're getting this information, but that's kind of a new tactic I've noticed they use now. They just say, well, the science has proven we're right. What science? I don't know. Sometimes I think maybe science doesn't mean what they think it means. I don't know, but I think the extremism on the left on this issue has become kind of and it's so calcified because it's a reaction to the extremism on the right. They're both extreme positions, but maybe if the left gave in a little bit. And by the way, in some states, actually in quite a few states, and I don't know that they're all red states necessarily, they did pass, or it's been on the books for a long time, fetal homicide, which is where, if there is say a car accident and a woman who is pregnant is in one of the vehicles, is a victim of a car accident, and the baby dies, the unborn baby dies, the other driver can be charged with fetal homicide. So it's not as though there's never been any compromise on this stuff anywhere, but the right really just consistently goes crazy, and they say crazy stuff. We all know that. Most recently, this guy, I forget, Virginia or West Virginia, this Republican who was running for office, who said, rape can be beautiful if it results in a birth of a child. They say consistently crazy stuff, and that makes me somewhat sympathetic. And I guess by virtue of being pro-choice, I'm going to be naturally more sympathetic to the left than on the right on this issue anyway. I admit there may be some bias there, but honestly, even looking at it objectively, I just think the right says and does such crazy stuff when it comes to this issue. I'm growing in my sympathy for the extremists on the left who, again, they're afraid to even give an inch because next thing you know, well, look what's been happening in Texas, but we'll get to that. Here's the good news I mentioned. And this is right in line with other things I presented on this show in terms of good news on abortion. This is from the Associated Press from just a couple of days ago. David Crary writes this: abortions declining in nearly all states. So let me read this quickly. It's short. Abortions have declined in states where new laws make it harder to have them, but they've also waned in states where abortion rights are protected, an Associated Press survey finds. Nearly everywhere in red states and blue, abortions are down since 2010. Explanations vary. Abortion rights advocates attribute it to expanded access to effective contraceptives and a drop in unintended pregnancies, which I think is absolutely correct. I've always believed education is the key. By the way, I've read on the air separate articles about how the rate of teen pregnancy in this country is also on the decline. I think there's a connection there. I think if both abortion and unwanted pregnancy rates among teenagers is dropping, then that says to me that expanded access to birth control and educating people about how not to get pregnant works. Gee, who would have thought? I know who doesn't think that, of course, Christian conservatives who think that, you know, everyone's going to hell if they have sex unless it's to make babies or whatever it is they believe. I'm sort of kidding, but some foes of abortion say there has been a shift in societal attitudes, with more women choosing to carry their pregnancies to term. Maybe that could be part of it. I don't know, but whether it is or it isn't, that doesn't prove that continuing to try to outlaw abortion somehow has affected this shift in societal attitudes about it. So several of, but see, they will never acknowledge that educating people about birth control might have something to do with the drop in abortion rates. And you know why they can't? Because one of the crazy things they insist on doing is, well, it's not crazy. It's actually very smart. They've conned a lot of people into believing that birth control, that, you know, the pill is a form of abortion. Literally, that if you take the pill, you know, the pill, the most relied upon, favored method of birth control for women for decades now, that is, in a sense, committing an abortion when you take the pill. And if you don't believe me, think about it. What is the morning after pill? The morning after pill is just an extremely high dose of regular birth control. That's all it is. So if you take the morning after pill, they say you're causing an abortion, which you're not. That is absolutely medically untrue, because the morning after pill is not the same thing as RU486, the abortion pill. The abortion pill causes an abortion. That's why it's called the abortion pill. The morning after pill does not. It prevents an unwanted pregnancy. But they intentionally conflate the two. They do it all the time. They'll talk about the two as though they are the same thing, and it is a deliberate tactic among the pro-lifers to confuse you into believing that they are the same thing, and therefore birth control is the same thing. Taking birth control is the same thing as having an abortion. It's absolute BS. But that's one of the things they do. And that's one of the reasons they can never acknowledge that allowing people or educating people and expanding access to birth control helps bring the rate of abortion down, because in their minds, or at least in their rhetoric, it's the same thing. Using birth control is the same thing as having an abortion. And so they look at it as, oh no, actually abortion's increasing. Oh, more people are taking the pill? Well, then they're having abortion. All these women taking the pill, they're having abortions. Every day they wake up and take the pill. Just one abortion after another. 365 abortions a year every woman who takes the pill has. I mean, that's really what they're saying. It's crazy stuff. See, so again, this is why I tend to have more sympathy with the left, even though I think both sides are extreme on this. I tend to sympathize more with the extremists on the left and why they feel like they have to dig in. I'm really starting to understand that better. Okay, back to the article. Several of the states that have been most aggressive in passing anti-abortion laws, including Indiana, Missouri, Ohio, and Oklahoma, have seen their abortion numbers drop by more than 15% since 2010. But more liberal states, such as New York, Washington, and Oregon, also had declines of that magnitude, even as they maintained unrestricted access to abortion. Hey, by the way, too, Washington is one of the states that legalized marijuana. And of course, a lot of these same folks on the right who oppose any access to abortion, they're also the fervent believers that marijuana is evil and that if you allow people to have marijuana, that everything's just going to go to hell. Although, again, Washington is one of those states, and apparently abortion is dropping. Gee, by their logic, you would think the opposite would happen. Everyone would be stoned all the time, and everyone would be pregnant and killing their unborn kids. I guess not, at least according to this. Oh, no, you know what? A liberal probably wrote this, so it's all BS anyway. That's the other thing they do that I love. I noticed that when I was a kid, and it hasn't changed. Any kind of objective information they're presented with that in any way conflicts with their agenda, oh, well, the liberal media. Nationwide, the AP survey showed a decrease in abortions of about 12% since 2010. Good. Well, I'd call that progress. I would. One major factor has been a decline in the teen pregnancy rate, which I mentioned earlier, also good news, which in 2010 reached its lowest level in decades. In 2010, the teen pregnancy rate in this country reached its lowest level in decades. Think about that. That is incredible. That is great news, right? Well, not if you talk to a Christian conservative, because they just reject any kind of good information, any kind of good news on this, whether it's teen pregnancy or abortion rates, they just reject it. They literally don't believe it. I've had conservative Christian Republicans say to me, well, I don't believe that. That can't possibly be right. And not just because it conflicts with their agenda, by the way, their pro-life agenda, also because as Christians, I'm talking about the Christian conservative Republicans specifically, they cannot allow themselves ever to believe that anything is getting better. They just flatly reject that anything ever improves. Everything's always getting worse. They are amongst the most pessimistic human beings you will ever meet. And I figured out why. I think I talked about it on the show like a year ago, because I finally realized why they're so pessimistic. Because their Christian belief system requires them to believe that everything is getting worse. You know, the old expression, the world's going to hell in a handbasket. Because everything is supposed to, according to the narrative, they believe everything is supposed to continue to get worse and worse and worse until finally things are so bad we have Armageddon or whatever, and we have the second coming of Christ and all that. So they can't even allow themselves to acknowledge any sort of progress in anything. Not only does a drop in abortion and teen pregnancy, not only does it directly conflict with their view that you have to outlaw abortion, but it also conflicts with them theologically, because, you know, everything has to get so bad that that it's the end times, and I don't know, we have 1,000 years of darkness or whatever is supposed to happen. All that. There's been no official updates since then, but the teen birth rate has continued to drop, which experts say signals a similar trend for teen pregnancies. By the way, in the state of Texas, and this is relevant because he's running for president, Governor Rick Perry is very proud of his abstinence-only education policy in Texas. He's talked about that. He talked about that a lot in 2011 and 2012. By the way, what he's probably not so proud of, but he very clumsily just dodges it or ignores the question when asked by someone in the media, if the abstinence-only policy is so great, why does Texas also have the highest teen pregnancy rate in the country? I've never heard any kind of intelligent or thoughtful answer to that question from him. Probably because it's a little hard to explain. The AP obtained the most recent abortion numbers from the health departments of all 45 states that compile such data on a comprehensive basis. States not compiling such data are California, Maryland, New Jersey, New Hampshire, and Wyoming. By the way, mentioning New Hampshire, which is, of course, where we do this show, last week on Rock, Paper, Hand Grenades, Gary and I talked with Jane Cormier, who's currently the president of New Hampshire Right to Life. And something that she's been complaining about, and others have too, is that New Hampshire doesn't really keep numbers on this stuff, which is strange and surprising. With one exception, the data was from either 2013 or 2014, providing a unique nationwide gauge of abortion trends during a wave of anti-abortion laws that gathered strength starting in 2011. Among the groups most active in promoting the restrictive laws in is Americans United for Life. Its president, Charmaine Yost, suggested that the broad decrease in abortions reflected a change in attitudes among pregnant women. She said, quote, "There's an entire generation of women who saw a sonogram as their first baby picture. There's an increased awareness of the humanity of the baby before it is born," unquote. I'm getting stuffy. This may get sneeze-tastic yet. But advocates for abortion rights said the figures demonstrate that restrictive laws are not needed to reduce the number of abortions significantly. Oh, imagine that. You don't need more laws. Right? I mean, aren't conservatives are always complaining. I mean, sometimes they sound like libertarians, correctly, by the way, in many instances when they complain about new laws. Oh, why do we always need new laws? And new laws don't change behavior. You can't legislate morality and all this behavior and all this, and yet they want to legislate this when, it seems to me, if we're not outlawing abortion, and things are getting better, then you don't need new laws on abortion. That can be achieved, they said, by helping more women obtain affordable, effective contraception, including long-lasting options such as IUDs and hormonal implants. Cecile Richards, president of Planned Parenthood Federation of America, said, quote, "Better access to birth control and sex education are the biggest factors in reducing unintended pregnancies. More restrictive abortion laws do not reduce the need for abortions," unquote. Agreed. Elizabeth Nash, a state issues expert for the Guttmacher Institute, a research group that supports abortion rights, said a total of 267 abortion restrictions have been enacted in 31 states since 2011. Among them are measures that ban most abortions after 20 weeks of pregnancies, impose hospital-like physical standards on abortion clinics, and require doctors who perform abortions at clinics to have admitting privileges at nearby hospitals. While some of the new laws have been blocked by lawsuits, most have taken effect, continuing to closure of about 70 abortion clinics in a dozen states since 2010. States with the most closures, according to state officials and advocacy groups, include Texas with 27, Michigan and Arizona with about 12, and Ohio with at least 4. 2 clinics closed in Virginia, including one that was the state's busiest. The only states with significant increases in abortions since 2010, this is interesting, are Republican-led Louisiana and Michigan, which have passed laws intended to restrict abortion. Oh, imagine that, making new laws on something and having it backfire. When does that ever happen, except for quite a bit? Louisiana, where abortions increased 12% between 2010 and 2014, was recently honored by Americans United for Life as the #1 state in taking steps to reduce access to abortion. That is so unintentionally hilarious. I must read that again. Louisiana, where abortions increased 12% between 2010 and 2014, was recently honored by Americans United for Life as the #1 state in taking steps to reduce access to abortion. Way to go, Louisiana. Good job taking those steps and accomplishing the exact opposite that you meant to do. What an honor that must be for you. I'm sure conservative Republican Governor Bobby Jindal is just so proud that they did these well-intended, well-meaning things. I mean, it backfired and made things worse, not better, but at least maybe God won't be angry with them or something. I don't know. In both Louisiana and in Michigan, where abortions rose by 18.5%, increases were due in part to women coming from other states where see, of course this is going to happen. Common sense would tell you this would happen. Women coming from other states where new restrictions and clinic closures have sharply limited abortion access. Anti-abortion groups said many Ohio women were going to Michigan and many Texas women to Louisiana. Of course. Why wouldn't that happen? Lori Carpenter, chief executive of Planned Parenthood Mid and South Michigan, argued that one factor in Michigan's increase was inadequate public funding for family planning. Genevieve Marnin of Michigan Right to Life said the increase resulted in part from new licensing and inspection regulations that prompted several abortion clinics to close a few years ago. She said some of these clinics had failed to report many of the abortions they performed and that women in those communities were now going to clinics with more scrupulous reporting practices. In all, about a dozen clinics closed. Marnin said 19 remain in operation. Okay, so by closing a bunch of clinics, that caused the increase in abortion rates because the clinics that weren't complying with the reporting of the number of abortions closed. So now everybody's just going to better clinics that report this stuff. So is she saying there hasn't really been an increase in abortions and that's an illusory number? Is that what she's saying? I'm not sure what she's saying. I mean, I kind of know what she's trying to say. She's trying to spin it. That's what she's trying to do. Both sides agree that one factor in Michigan's upsurge in abortions is an influx of women coming from Ohio, where several abortion clinics recently closed. According to Michigan's health department, abortions for non-residents jumped from 708 in 2013 to 1,318 in 2014. This article's longer than I thought. There's even more to this, but you can read the whole thing. It's called Abortions Declining in Nearly All States. It went up on the AP wire on the 7th, so a few days ago. I talked about, we'll get to this too, because I referenced it earlier, Scott Walker. Listen to this. Okay. This came from HuffPost. Laura Bassett reports, Wisconsin abortion ban would allow father to sue for emotional distress. This was posted back on the 3rd, so the story's about a week old. Wisconsin Governor Scott Walker said this week that he would sign a ban on abortions after 20 weeks of pregnancy. That does not contain exceptions for rape and incest victims, of course. If the bill reaches his desk, the measure also contains a less discussed provision that would allow the father to sue the doctor for emotional and psychological distress if he disagrees with the abortion, regardless of his relationship with the woman having the procedure. Yep. Wisconsin Assembly Bill 237 would ban abortions after 20 weeks post-fertilization, which doctors would measure as 22 weeks of pregnancy, since pregnancies are usually measured from the woman's last menstrual period. If the bill becomes law, doctors who perform an abortion after this time could be charged with a felony and fined up to $10,000 or face up to 3.5 years in prison. In addition to those penalties, the bill would allow the father to sue the doctor for damages, including damages for personal injury and emotional and psychological distress if the doctor performs or attempts to perform an abortion after the 20-week limit. The man does not need to be married to the woman or even in a relationship with her to sue her doctor, as long as the pregnancy is not a result of sexual assault or incest. The bill also says the woman can sue. The woman can sue? So the woman can sue the doctor? So the woman can sue the doctor for emotional and psychological distress if she decides to have the abortion? This just gets even stranger, doesn't it? Wow. Well, you know what? At least the man can't sue if the pregnancy was a result of a sexual assault. I'm glad we're not going to allow rapists to sue their victims who become pregnant. That's reassuring. Walker and the co-authors of the bill, State Rep Jesse Kremer, Republican, and Senate President Mary Lasik, Republican, did not respond to requests for comments. Yeah, they're going to duck this one. The Wisconsin House and Senate are expected to vote on the bill next week. Hopefully it doesn't pass. According to the Guttmacher Institute, a research organization that supports reproductive rights, 6 of the 11 states that currently ban abortions at 20 weeks post-fertilization, Alabama, Arkansas, Idaho, Kansas, Nebraska, and Oklahoma, have similar language tucked into their respective laws that allow the parents to sue a doctor who performs an abortion after that point. In Kansas, the provision applies to the father only if he is married to the woman who had the abortion. So far, the 20-week ban is not standing up well in court. The 9th U.S. Circuit Court of Appeals struck down Idaho's law last week, ruling it, quote, unconstitutional because it categorically bans some abortions before viability, unquote. The Supreme Court decided in Roe v. Wade in 1973 that states cannot ban abortions before the fetus would be viable outside the womb, which is estimated to occur between 22 and 24 weeks of pregnancy. That's why we hear that sometimes in these discussions, the word viability. Republican supporters of the bill argue that abortions should be banned after 20 weeks because fetuses can feel pain at that point, a theory that has been refuted by the mainstream medical community. Oh, they're a bunch of liberals. Walker told reporters this week, quote, whether you're pro-life or not, that's a good time to say that shouldn't be legal after a time when an unborn child can literally feel pain, unquote. Opponents of the bill point out that less than 1% of abortions occur after 20 weeks. That's important. Less than 1% of abortions occur after 20 weeks. And the women who seek them have often discovered severe medical problems with the fetus that were not clear in earlier tests. Mary Stetch, a spokeswoman for the Progressive Women's PAC Emily's List, said the Wisconsin bill is extreme, outrageous, and profoundly wrong. She said, quote, a woman's right to choose is hers and hers alone. Scott Walker is the last person on earth who should be telling women how to make their deeply personal decisions. Agreed, and that is one of the reasons why I am pro-choice, regardless of how I personally feel about it. But this is important. Something that a lot of people miss is it's important. And again, this is why I'm sympathetic to the left when they dig in on this stuff. You got to pay attention to this stuff where they want to, when they discuss, what they call late-term abortion, or in this case, after 20 weeks, the language is not, legislatively, typically is not written in a way that says, okay, we want to ban abortion after this point unless medically necessary. Typically, the language is written as, we want to ban abortion after this point, period. So that there is no, so that if it is medically necessary, the doctor can't say, well, it's late, but we have to do this. Because if they do, some of this legislation, if it passes, if the doctor does do that, to not do that, he may violate his Hippocratic oath if the woman's life is in danger or something like that. These situations do happen. But if he does do that, he's going to end up a felon. I mean, it's crazy stuff. Crazy stuff. And we should get to Texas because there was reference in the other article, and here's an update from just yesterday. This is also from HuffPost. Samantha Lockman writes, many clinics likely to close as federal appeals court upholds Texas abortion restrictions. A 3-judge panel of the 5th U.S. Circuit Court of Appeals has upheld, and this surprises me, by the way, has upheld some of the most onerous parts of a Texas abortion law, which is likely to cause most of the state's abortion clinics to close. The ruling released on Tuesday allowed provisions requiring clinics to meet hospital-level operating standards and require providers to have admitting privileges at local hospitals to go into effect. It did exempt the last open clinic in the state's Rio Grande Valley from the provisions which were passed by the Republican-controlled state legislature and signed by former Governor Why does it say former governor? Well, signed by Governor Rick Perry 2 years ago. In court, attorneys opposing the law said it could close all but 8 clinics in Texas. In plain terms, HB 2 and its provisions may be applied throughout Texas, except the Supreme Court precedent requires us to partially uphold the Texas court's injunction of the ambulatory surgical center requirement as applied to the, you know what, I don't even want to bother with the rest of this. You get the idea. Basically, they found a way to close. Oh, I'm sorry. That's right. I forget that Rick Perry's not still in office. It's Greg Abbott's the governor there now. They've closed a bunch of clinics. And again, we know what will inevitably happen. Those people now, they can go to, remember, Louisiana and continue to push that abortion rate up. And then perhaps Louisiana can get another reward. Oh, God. Let's completely shift gears in our remaining moments because we'll discuss Jeb Bush a little bit. Jeb Bush said something that, you know, up until now, I haven't really taken him that seriously. I mean, his numbers aren't that great, his polling numbers, although, again, I don't know whose are. But I do know that most likely whoever becomes the Republican nominee for president and whoever becomes the next president will be another war hawk, will continue the policies of President Barack Obama and President George W. Bush as we continue our war on terror or whatever it is we're supposed to call it these days, and we'll continue to fuel the military-industrial complex because we are a war economy. That's our number one export, after all. But Jeb said some things that really concern me, specifically regarding Putin and his actions in regard to Ukraine. Now, it's kind of fallen out of the headlines because it's been dragging on for a while, and, you know, kind of have limited attention spans in this country, and the media can only cover so many things at once, apparently, effectively, but you know, the Russian incursion into Ukraine certainly has not ended. This is one of the things, you know, I'm an independent, and I didn't vote for Obama in 2012. I did in 2008. In 2012, I voted for Libertarian candidate Gary Johnson. Very well might end up, if he runs, doing the same thing in 2016, quite frankly. But in terms of Obama, you know, there's things where I've been very critical of him. But there's also things about him where, you know, I stick up for him because I think he's correct. And one of the areas where I find myself sticking up for him is in regards to the Ukraine situation and Vladimir Putin's insistence on the Ukraine incursion. Obama, I think, has handled that just fine. There was, you know, a lot of Republicans took shots at him right when it first happened, almost to the point where it sounded like they were praising Vladimir Putin for being so daring and trying to use that as an example of Obama's weakness as commander-in-chief and whatnot. The Obama administration has been very aggressive, as I understand it, with economic sanctions. However, Obama has essentially taken off the table any kind of military action, doing anything militarily to discourage Putin and the Russians from this behavior. My understanding is that historically, the relationship between Russia and Ukraine is complex and complicated, and that does not in any way condone or excuse Putin's actions in invading Ukraine, or at least Crimea. And I guess I haven't paid as much attention lately either. I don't know how much further they've pressed into Ukraine. I know that there are apparently there is a faction of Ukrainians who actually would like to become part of Russia. So it's complicated stuff. But Obama, in my opinion, has handled it correctly by saying we will use economic sanctions to discourage this. And again, they've been far-reaching and very damaging from what I understand, but we're not going to do anything militarily. Ukraine is not part of NATO. Obviously, God forbid, If Putin had decided to make this kind of move against one of our NATO allies, then we would be involved. We have to honor that. We have to honor that treaty and get involved. Ukraine's not part of NATO, so we are under no obligation to get involved. And I'm glad. I don't want to get involved because I often refer to back in 2000, when the Bush administration, when the George W. Bush administration was getting ready to assume power. I remember seeing Dick Cheney on Nightline being interviewed by, at that time it was Ted Koppel. And the subject of Russia came up. And one of the things Cheney said, and I don't give Dick Cheney credit for a lot. In fact, I think he's a war criminal and belongs in prison, quite frankly. I think that whole administration has a lot of blood on their hands. But I'll give him credit for this because I think he was 100% right. He said something then. These words still chill me, but I think they bear being repeated and remembered. He said, regardless of what the relationship is now between the United States and the former Soviet Union, because at that time it was very good. Now it's pretty strained these days, but at the time it was good in the post-Cold War era. He said, we must never forget, and I'm paraphrasing, I don't remember his exact words verbatim, but he said, we must never forget those nuclear weapons are still there, and the former Soviet Union does still have the power, the capability to incinerate the entire United States within a matter of minutes. Pretty scary stuff. Very real, very accurate. I give Dick Cheney credit for pointing that out because I've often thought that myself. I remember during the 90s kind of lamenting that it felt like the United States had fallen into a sort of post-Cold War complacency. Meanwhile, there's these loose nukes out there. You know, there were all those Russian scientists who were starving, needed to feed their families. They started selling off this information and selling off this material just to survive. There are unaccounted for nuclear weapons in this world, and there are also nuclear weapons where we know exactly where they are. They are sitting in silos in Russia. Obama, in my view, absolutely 100% correct to not want to poke the bear militarily. As it is, it feels like in some ways we're back to the Cold War. I don't want to be in all ways back to the Cold War. You know, I growing up in the 80s, I at one point had a obsession, might be too strong a word, but like a lot of people my age who grew up during the Cold War, I had a strong preoccupation, shall we say, with the prospect of nuclear war. The idea that Armageddon could happen any day. I remember my parents letting me watch The Day After, the TV movie The Day After when I was a kid. I don't know if it was the best choice to let me watch it, but then again, I don't know if me not seeing it would have made any difference. I was already kind of preoccupied with the prospect of nuclear war. I don't want to worry about that now. So, to suggest that we need to, again, poke the bear in terms of Vladimir Putin is crazy to me. Jeb Bush is saying crazy things. According to Reuters, Michelle Martin writes this, dated today. Likely Republican presidential candidate Jeb Bush said on Wednesday that Russian President Vladimir Putin was a bully, and the United States and its allies in Europe should be resolute in responding to Russian aggression. And again, we've already responded in terms of sanctions. We've responded economically. But clearly, he's talking about militarily. That is scary. Bush, the brother of former U.S. President George W. Bush, is on a 5-day tour of Europe in a bid to prove his foreign policy credentials before he is expected to launch his candidacy for the Republican presidential nomination next week. Quote, ultimately, I think to deal with Putin, you need to deal from strength. He's a bully, and you enable bad behavior when you're nuanced with a guy like that, unquote. Then he went on to say, quote, just being clear, I'm not talking about being bellicose, but saying here are the consequences of your actions that would deter the kind of bad outcome we don't want to see, unquote. Bush said signaling what further sanctions Russia could face and reassuring Poland and the Baltic states that the United States would meet its NATO obligations to view an attack on one member state as an attack against the whole alliance could help halt Putin's aggression. Quote, if he thinks we're resolute, I think that's the greatest possibility of restricting any kind of further aggressions, unquote. Remember a few weeks ago, I was reading an article where presidential candidate Gary Hart, I think back, when did he run? 88. He was talking about how the Bushes seem to, there's sort of a two-dimensional thinking that goes on where they don't understand nuance. And I think he's right because, for one thing, he basically, it sounds like he's saying we need to go ahead and threaten the Russians and say, we don't like what you've done so far. If you start to screw with one of our NATO allies, again, remember, Ukraine is not part of NATO, but if you are further emboldened and you decide to mess with one of our NATO allies, then we are getting involved. Why would we do that? There is such a thing, and if you know anything about foreign policy, you've heard the term strategic ambiguity. You don't go around making threats that you don't know you necessarily want to bind yourself to and commit to. Why would we? Look, I've never held office in my life. I've never served in government. I've never been in the military. I certainly have no foreign policy experience or credentials whatsoever. And yet somehow I understand something that I fear the guy who could possibly be our next president doesn't get. That part of keeping your opponent or potential opponent off balance and concerned about what you might do next is you don't tip your hand and tell them what you're going to do next. So is he really saying we should go to Putin and say, hey, what you've done now is bad and we're mad about it, but you mess with one of our NATO allies and then we're going to do something militarily? Why would we do that? Isn't it smarter to let Putin wonder what we would do and to assume that we might do the worst? The worst, by the way, ultimately the worst is missiles start flying. You know what I mean? Which is what we kind of want to avoid. I mean, call me a coward, but if nobody minds, I would prefer to not have a global thermonuclear Armageddon. It kind of ruined my day. I don't know about you. So I'd like to be a little bit smart about this stuff. And Jeb sounds like W. Imagine if George W. Bush were still president and Putin had done this. Would we be sending troops over there and engaging the Russians directly militarily? It's a really, 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 really bad idea. I'm sure if we'd ended up with a President McCain, God forbid, we already wouldn't even still be here. We'd have already had Armageddon because that guy wants to go to war at the slightest inclination. Let's go to war. He's always ready for war. But there's more to this article if you want to read it. But it scares the hell out of me, and we're out of time. So hopefully it's just talk. I mean, look, what are the odds? I mean, obviously there's a chance he could be president, but every candidate knows that when they're running, they can say whatever they want to. Ultimately, they're accountable for their actions. They're not really accountable for their words, unfortunately. We're not very good as an electorate at holding people accountable for their words. But we are out of time, so thank you all. I would just remind you a couple things quickly. I'm going to be on John Hopwood's show again this week, Ward 13, so looking forward to that. Also, tomorrow night on IPM Nation live station, you can hear me on Dr. Kevin's show at 6 p.m. Eastern. I will be his guest, and I think I'm going to be actually guest hosting for him a few times over the summer because he's going across the pond over to England, so there might be some times that he needs me to fill in. I look forward to that. And of course, the radio edition of Matt Connarton Unleashed every Tuesday and Thursday night, 11 p.m. Eastern on IPM Nation and Ohm Times Radio as well. So, and by the way, we are the only political show on Ohm Times Radio. They got a lot of great shows there, mostly stuff about meditation and self-help and whatnot. So we're kind of the black sheep of Ohm Times, which I personally enjoy. So that's it for now. If you're watching live on Wednesday, I'll be back later with the Honorable Gary S. Hopper for Rock, Paper, Hand Grenades. Until then, I'll talk at you all later. Bye.